Good afternoon. My name is Virginia Thomas, and in this presentation, my research team and I will share some findings from a lifespan study of the benefits and costs of constant digital connectivity. There's increasingly the sense in our culture that unplugging from technology is an important thing. There are appeals to disconnect to reconnect, and books advising us on how to go on a digital diet. There's now a National Day of Unplugging every March, and other initiatives like the Bored and Brilliant Project that encourage people to unplug and see what happens. In the communications literature, this is called media refusal or pushback, and it describes people's resistance to participating in various media technologies. We are most interested in computer-mediated communication like texting, posting on social media sites, and video chat, all of which can be done with a Wi-Fi connection and a mobile device, which is usually always by our side. Very little empirical work has investigated people's experiences of such media refusal. In these first two studies, the participants spent 4 or 5 days unplugged from all media and showed increases in the variables under investigation. Adults were better creative problem solvers, and preteens were better able to recognize emotional cues. In this third study, a large international sample of college students was asked to unplug from this type of media for 24 hours, and only half of them were able to complete the task. They reported that unplugging left them feeling anxious and addicted, but also relieved. Each of these studies investigated a particular age group, but we were interested in age differences, given the varying experiences between digital natives, adolescents and emerging adults who have grown up with the internet and computer-mediated communication, versus digital immigrants, those of us who are older, who first began using these technologies in our 20s, 30s, or even older. Because there is very little data on people's attitudes about unplugging, my research team and I posed quite open-ended research questions. First, how do people feel about unplugging for 24 hours, and are there age differences in those attitudes and feelings? We predicted that anxiety would be the most frequently reported feeling, and that younger participants would report more negative feelings, given that they can be classified as digital natives. Second, we explored the expected costs and benefits of unplugging. To our knowledge, no one has systematically investigated this, especially in a qualitative methodology. We recruited 3 waves of participants. First, an adult sample that ranged from 18 to 79-year-old via snowball sampling on Facebook. Second, a sample of college students from our university here in Santa Cruz, and high school students from 2 public high schools, one in California and one in Michigan. We analyzed the sample according to developmental age group: adolescents ages 14 to 17, emerging adults ages 18 to 29, middle-aged adults ages 30 to 49, and older adults 50 years and older. The study consisted of an online survey that asked questions about their current daily habits of accessing computer-mediated communication, such as text, Skype, Facebook, Twitter, email, and instant message, and we asked them how they would feel about going without such technologies for 24 hours. We also asked open-ended questions, which they typed their responses to in the online survey. We wanted to know, given a hypothetical hiatus from these technologies for 24 hours, what they would do with their time, what they felt they would lose and gain, and whether or not they ever thought it was time to take a break from digital technology. We predicted participants of all ages would most often report feeling anxious about unplugging, but we found that feelings like disconnected, not surprisingly, but also bored, free, and relaxed all were listed more frequently than feeling anxious. Age does seem to matter when it comes to feelings and behaviors around unplugging. Negative emotions such as boredom, irritation, all decreased with age. indicating that the adolescents had the most negative reactions to withdrawing from computer-mediated communication. The relationship between age and anxiety was not linear, however. Anxiety frequencies spiked for emerging adults, and a chi-square indicated that anxiety was actually most prominent among these emerging adult participants. There did seem to be some age differences. For example, Ruby, an adolescent, said, "I would be anxious, wondering if I got calls or texts." Jeremy, an emerging adult, said, "I'm in continual communication with a handful of friends/family members throughout every day, and it is expected/a habit. If I were to stop communicating with these people out of the blue for one day, it would seem odd, and I would feel anxious." And finally, Megan, a middle-aged adult, said, "I love to be away from technology or choose not to use it, but I get anxious knowing my kids cannot get a hold of me if they needed me." Now I'd like to share some results from the qualitative analysis of the open-ended questions. First, participants weighed in on what they would lose if they were to unplug for 24 hours. For all age groups, the most frequent response by far was connection with friends and families. For example, Louisa, adolescent, said, "I wouldn't talk to my friends for a day, and I wouldn't be able to see what's going on in their life." Brittany, an emerging adult, told us, "I'm in a long-distance relationship, so the success of our relationship is dependent on these technologies." And Alice, an older adult, said, "I would miss pictures of my grandchildren. I wouldn't hear about what they're doing." As you can see, CMC helps these participants sustain close relationships and make intimacy possible, as well as enable them to keep tabs on friends and family. Then we asked them what they would gain if they were to unplug. You can see that connecting with friends and family is no longer the number one response. It's more in the middle. But other gains were listed more frequently, such as being more productive, having more free time, and gaining an enhanced mental state. We were interested particularly in the gain of personal time because emerging adults were significantly more likely to list it than any other age group. For example, Casey said, "I would have time to just be by myself." Steve also said, "I would gain some self-awareness." And finally, Felicia said that she would gain a deeper connection with myself and feelings, learning more about myself and my aspirations. Finally, we asked our participants whether they ever feel like it's time to take a break from computer-mediated communication. Approximately 3/4 of participants replied yes, because they felt like it wasted too much of their time or their use felt too habitual, and many actually used the word addicted. And for adolescents in particular, being plugged in resulted in too much drama and in some cases, bullying. Here are their words. Carla, an older adult, told us, "I check social networking sites too often and feel compelled to do so. Twice a day is sufficient, but I check every few hours." Marcus, an emerging adult, said, "The technologies take over my life. I think from viewing them, it makes me depressed. People create these false lives and no one can question them. I get more anxiety not being invited to a public party on Facebook than prepping for an exam." And finally, Luke, an adolescent, told us, "The drama and the lies and the bullying is just too much." However, a full quarter of the participants reported that they didn't feel like they needed to take a break. And overwhelmingly, the theme of these responses was that their use of technology felt balanced. For example, Caitlin said, "I love technology, and I believe it makes my life better. I use the communication technologies I like and avoid the ones I'm not interested in. I don't feel an obligation to use these technologies when I'm not in the mood or when I have something better to do. And Paula, a middle-aged adult, said, "It's a tool and a great one. Why would I give it up?" So, what did we learn? First, emerging adults are the age group that is the most anxious about unplugging. We speculate that this is because emerging adults, unlike adolescents, tend to be more transient due to frequent moves for jobs, college, military service, or travel. Their social networks begin to spread geographically, and they depend on computer-mediated communication to maintain these relationships. Without computer-mediated, isolated from their networks, unlike most adolescents who live with their families and near most of their friends. But despite their anxiety, emerging adults seem to feel like a gain by unplugging, especially in regards to spending quality time with themselves. We know from developmental research that volitional solitude is an important ecological niche for emerging adults because it can facilitate identity work and self-awareness, all of which is made possible by the advances in abstract thought and formal operational thinking. Finally, participants of all ages experienced the following paradox. Connection with family and friends emerged as a common theme for both perceived gains and losses. It appears our participants found themselves in a dilemma. They viewed digital devices as tools to connect, but at the same time perceived them as barriers to real-time interaction with people they cared about. This is a good example of the sort of everyday yet which requires post-formal thinking skills to resolve. Thank you for your time and interest in our research. If you have questions or comments for us, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thanks so much.